this is just the beginning.
Welcome to an Axios virtual event, COVID-19 vaccines and the road ahead. I'm Mike Allen, a co-founder of Axios, coming to you from Axios HQ in Arlington, Virginia. Thank you to Pharma for making these conversations possible. And we welcome our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. We'd love for you to join the conversation on Twitter at Axios, #Axios Events. I'll be joined by my colleague, Caitlin Owens, who's been covering healthcare for Axios all through the pandemic. Our first guest, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who will be coming to us from NIAID headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Fauci, they call you the most trusted man in America. Welcome to Axios.
Thank you, Mike. Good to be with you.
Dr. Fauci, you've talked from the beginning about vaccine equity, and we obviously still have a long way to go. What happened?
Well, I think we are making some significant headway. We started off with the equity issue when the NIH was very much involved in the clinical trials to prove the safety and the efficacy of the Moderna, the Pfizer, the J&J vaccines. We wanted to make sure that there was equitable representation of minorities in the clinical trials for a start, to show that when it's safe and effective, you can honestly say it's safe and effective in a variety of demographic groups. Once the vaccines received an emergency use authorization, we made it very clear that the implementation of the rollout of the vaccinations had to have equity as a primary consideration. And that's actually what's happening with the vaccine the vaccine community centers, the federally qualified vaccine centers, the pharmacies, the mobile units. All of that is geared towards making sure there's equitable distribution to minority groups, particularly brown and black people.
Dr. Fauci, what have we learned about vaccine development and distribution rollout that we'll need to know for, heaven help us, the next pandemic?
Well, I think it's doing a lot of what we did. And I think, as I mentioned a moment ago, you start off by making sure when you do the vaccine trials that you have equitable demographic representation in the trial, because you don't want a trial done only with one demographic group. There will always be the question, is it safe and effective? Once you get past that, then clearly you have to have a structure in which you pay primary attention to equity. And that was really what President Biden made as a very core part of the rollout of the vaccine distribution. And as I mentioned a moment ago, you do that by putting the availability of vaccines, be they in the vaccine distribution centers, the community centers, or in the pharmacies, you put it in geographic locations that are easily accessible to the minority groups. When you do that, you really take a pretty broad step towards equity in the distribution.
Dr. Fauci, this is a question from an Axios audience member in Denver. They ask, with the new guidance on masks, are you concerned about a spike in cases, hospitalizations, and how quickly will we know if that's going to happen?
Well, first of all, it's important, Mike, to understand what the new guidance on masks were directed at. It said that people who were vaccinated can now feel safe, that they do not need to wear a mask either outdoors or indoors. It did not say that people who are not vaccinated should abandon their masks. It said people who are not vaccinated should continue to wear masks and should get vaccinated. So I think people are misinterpreting, thinking that this is a removal of a mask mandate for everyone. It's not. It's an assurance to those who are vaccinated that they can feel safe, be they outdoors or indoors.
Dr. Fauci, that's super interesting. When you say it looks like people are misinterpreting it, so based on the news coverage, your observations, you think people without vaccinations are overinterpreting that new guidance?
I think there's a danger of that. And I think in reality, that's what we're seeing, because people are hearing and they misinterpret guidelines. That happens all the time. It's not their fault. That's just people either read them quickly or listen and hear half of it, they are feeling that we're saying you don't need a mask anymore. That's not what the CDC said. They said if you are vaccinated, you can feel safe that you will not get infected either outdoors or indoors. It did explicitly not say that unvaccinated people should abandon their masks.
You're a master communicator. How should you and the administration, public health professionals fix that?
Well, I think by getting out there and doing the kind of discussions that you and I are having right now, Mike, I think it needs to be drilled down over and over again what the intent and the reality of that guideline is. And the bottom line is we hope that as a secondary spinoff of that, people realize why it's so advantageous, not only for their own health, for that of their family, but for the community in general, for them to get vaccinated. And one of the advantages is you can feel safe really anywhere, whether you're outdoors or indoors, and you don't have to wear a mask.
Dr. Fauci, how soon will we need a COVID booster shot?
Well, we don't know exactly when that will be, Mike, but I believe it likely would be within a year. We know that the vaccine durability of the efficacy lasts at least 6 months and likely considerably more. But I think we will almost certainly require a booster sometime within a year or so after getting the primary, because the durability of protection against coronaviruses is generally not lifelong, similar to measles. Measles would be lifelong protection, but that's not what I believe that we'll be seeing.
How soon will we be on airplanes without masks?
Well, that's a complicated issue, Mike. It's complicated because the people who are vaccinated could easily be on airplanes without a mask because we know you're protected whether you're indoor or outdoor. The trouble is that we don't have vaccine passports. So we don't know who is vaccinated or not. We don't know who is infected or not. And the risk of putting someone in a closed space like an airline where you don't have any choice that you can just get up and leave in the middle of what you're doing, that since that's the case, one can understand quite clearly why the airlines, even though they respect the fact that people who are vaccinated are protected, they don't want to see spread in the airline. And that's the reason why they still maintain the mask mandate.
It's obviously not in the short term. You think months, years?
Well, I hope that we get enough people vaccinated that at least on domestic flights, that it would be a matter of months. The issue globally is a different story because we could do a very good job of getting the overwhelming majority of our population vaccinated in the United States, yet you could have raging infection in other parts of the world, like we're seeing in India, in South Africa, and certain countries in South America.
Dr. Fauci, this is an Axios reader question from McLean, Virginia. You're a grandpa. If your family had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, would the two of them be getting vaccines when they can?
Well, I'm not a grandparent yet, hopefully soon, but I'm not. But if I were, I would say that 6 and 4-year-olds would likely be able to get vaccinated by the time we reach the end of calendar year 2021 and at the latest into the first quarter of 2022.
And you would recommend it?
Oh, absolutely. If I had grandchildren, I would certainly recommend they get vaccinated.
Dr. Fauci, what's the smartest question that a president, any president has asked you?
Well, I don't know if it's the smartest, but when President George W. Bush asked if we could do something that would be transforming to save the lives of millions of people in Southern Africa who are suffering or at risk for HIV/AIDS, he asked the question which led to the development of the PEPFAR program, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which thus far has saved approximately 18 million lives worldwide. That was clearly a really good question that President George W. Bush asked.
What's President Biden's style when he's taking in information?
He's quite serious. He has a good sense of humor and is a very pleasant person. But when it comes to the country and the risk of COVID-19, he's dead serious. He wants to make sure everything's done correctly, and he wants the facts just as they are. So when you deal with him one-on-one and you're dealing about a serious subject, he's the most serious guy in the room.
Dr. Fauci, penultimate question for you. How's the news media done on the serious to sensational scale, on the clear to foggy scale? How's America's media served our audiences?
I think in general, the mainstream media has served our audiences really quite well. I believe it's done a pretty accurate accounting of the facts. We have some fringe media that get involved in conspiracy theories and denials and false alternative facts and denials of reality that's sitting right in front of you. So I think that you'd have to divide the media into the standard classical media and then some of the fringe media. And I think, as I mentioned, the standard classical media that we know of has done a good job.
A quick audience question. If a mother is vaccinated and then has a child, is the baby immune to COVID?
Well, the baby would be immune if the mother was vaccinated during pregnancy or before pregnancy. The baby would get, during the pregnancy period, through the placenta, antibodies against the virus. So the baby could be protected there. After birth, that lasts just a couple of months. But if the mother breastfeeds, the mother likely will transmit the antibodies to the baby through breastfeeding. So the baby gets the double opportunity. One, through the placenta during the pregnancy period itself, and that lasts for a few months after birth, or a continuation of that with breastfeeding.
And Dr. Fauci, we always end with one fun thing. So as you look forward to a maskless future, one of the great things about living in DC is we now and then see you around town. What indoor dining adventure have you either had or looking forward to with these new rules?
Well, I'm looking forward. I have not been inside a restaurant sitting down with my wife, which I enjoy doing every once in a while. I look forward to that. We have a few of our favorite restaurants, and as soon as things loosen up a bit, I'll be in there without a mask enjoying a meal.
How soon do you think that'll be?
Oh, I hope so very soon. I think we're starting to see now all 50 states have now shown decrease in the number of infections. I think pretty soon, certainly by July 4th, when the president said he's aiming at getting 70% of the adult population receiving at least one dose of vaccine. So hopefully as we get into the summer, I'll be able to do that regularly.
And as we say goodbye, what's going to be your first maskless vacation?
I'm trying to get my 3 daughters, who I haven't seen in a long time, at least 2 of them, and just get together and just go off somewhere for a few days, maybe to the Eastern Shore. I live in Washington, so maybe that'll be a good place to go.
Dr. Fauci, thank you for serving America, and thank you for joining Axios.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci, and thank you to Pharma for making these conversations possible. Now we have a view from the top conversation. We'll go to Axios CEO Jim Vandehei.
Thank you very much, Mikey. It is now my pleasure to bring you a conversation with Steve Ubel, who is the CEO and president of Pharma. How are you doing, Steve?
Great, Jim. Nice to be with you today.
I remember talking to you in the early days of the coronavirus about the possibilities of a vaccine. And I think you were optimistic that the industry would get there. But if my mind is correct, like you thought it might take even longer than it eventually did to be able to get a vaccine manufactured to scale with mass distribution. Have you been surprised by the industry's capacity to do what it's done?
Well, I've been cautiously optimistic in the early days because if you recall, it took over 2 years during the SARS epidemic to get the first candidate vaccine into human trials. So it really is a remarkable feat for the industry to have developed essentially a new class of medicine and vaccines and therapeutics. And to do it inside a calendar year is frankly a modern medical miracle.
And what were the points that you feel like you started to give you optimism? Like what had to happen in that R&D process for you to say, whoa, wait a second, maybe this can go quicker? And what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think there are 3 or 4 really key learnings on how the industry was able to move quickly. The first is what we do. We had a 100-year running start. If you look at the companies who've been successful, look at Gilead developing remdesivir. They leaned heavily on decades of experience in SARS and MERS, in HIV and hepatitis C. Pfizer, other companies on the vaccines, monoclonal antibodies are companies developing those. So they're leaning on deep scientific knowledge gained over decades of experience, and they were able to lever that in the current pandemic. I think also investments in new technology, being able to decode the virus shortly after the first cases were uncovered in China. And if you look at the partnerships, if you look at what Europe did, is essentially a procurement exercise. Our government, both the previous administration and this administration, looked at it as a true partnership. So they were involved very early on in developing streamlined approaches to clinical trials, de-risking the enterprise, helping to defray costs for smaller companies like Moderna in conducting their clinical trials. And then the final point I would make is, we have the best innovation ecosystem in the world. We have the best doctors, the best hospitals, the best access to capital. So it's really not a surprise that US companies really led the development of vaccines and therapeutics.
And what barriers still remain? Obviously, we're getting a vaccine distributed at scale in the US. Overseas, it's a little bit harder. Obviously, there's a lot of people around the world. Like, what are the biggest barriers, especially the ones that would be removable?
Yeah, early on, the biggest barrier was how do we streamline the clinical trial process so that companies came together with the government to try to determine uniform endpoints to the clinical trials. They agreed to share information from those clinical trials in real time, as opposed to completing a clinical trial and posting that information on clinicaltrial.gov. They were sharing patient outcomes in real time with the government, with each other. And so those were some of the early stage barriers. Clinical trials were also decentralized because patients couldn't go to healthcare facilities. So we were able to use decentralized approaches and really lever digital tools to measure patients' progress. And then sort of midway through the pandemic, the barriers that we focused on really centered on manufacturing capacity and trying to debottleneck, look around corners at those barriers. So for example, vials. You think about vials as sort of an ancillary product to the process, but turns out there's only, a handful of manufacturers of vials. They tend to use the same kind of sand. So how do you reach into the manufacturing process and really identify barriers early on that can be addressed so they don't become issues later on in the process? And today we're really focused on vaccine hesitancy. You've got supply and demand that have roughly equalized. We're reaching into hard to reach communities, trying to rebuild trust, candidly, for past wrongs, and really encourage people to get vaccinated and reaching out to other stakeholders in partnership. We just did an event recently with the U.S. Black Chambers of Commerce. We have a partnership for infectious disease with over 200 organizations, all focused on addressing vaccine hesitancy. And as I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, we're now focused on global supply. How do we ramp up supply and make sure that we're vaccinating people all over the world?
And how do you do that? Like, what are the keys that will be able to help facilitate quicker distribution of vaccines across the world, especially in the harder to reach places?
Yeah, our industry, Jim, is deeply committed to global access. Our companies have over 275 manufacturing partnerships around the world aimed at increasing supply. We're deeply committed to COVAX, which is a WHO facility that's organized to accept product donations and resources. So hundreds of millions of doses are being committed to COVAX. And more than anything, working with our government and other governments to ramp up supply. And third-party estimates are that there'll be 10 to 12 billion doses available by the end of this calendar year. So that's the good news. The bad news, I would say, the Biden administration made a unprecedented decision to allow intellectual property to be waived for vaccines. And we think that will undermine the global response. In the short run, not only is it not going to put shots in arms, it's likely to harm the overall effort. Because if I'm giving you the recipe, Jim, for the vaccine, but it takes you 3 years to build the kitchen in order to make it, and I'm not going to give you the raw materials, which are still in very scarce supply, it's really an empty gesture. It's not going to lead to more shots in arms. But what it might do is throw into competition access to those raw materials. So you might have manufacturers in India or other places that might compete with a Pfizer or other manufacturer for the same raw materials, when Pfizer obviously does have the capacity to manufacture the product. So instead, we think the U.S. Could share more of its vaccine supply. We need more voluntary licensing arrangements where our companies are partnering, as I said before, with other manufacturers. And we need to work on last mile distribution issues, just like we are here in the U.S., setting up vaccination sites, making sure we have the right personnel in place and so forth.
And Steve, as we wrap up, conversations you and I would have before the coronavirus were often about legislation and politics around drug pricing. Now, because of what we've seen over the past year, you have people now saying, well, wait, like miracles can actually happen if you get the right drug at the right time. They talk about lessons learned from the creation of some of these vaccines being applied to cancer and other things that once seemed uncurable. How optimistic should we be about that being a reality, that we might start to see cures for things like cancer because of some of the learnings from the vaccine creation and distribution?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that the silver lining is that the pandemic has been a clarifying moment. Obviously the value associated with effective vaccines and therapeutics that are bringing us all back to normal. And in the exchanges I've had with policymakers, they really are looking at the industry in a different way. But we're really entering the golden era of medicine. The mRNA platform that was developed and so central to the progress that we made on vaccines actually holds tremendous promise across not only vaccines and variants for the future, but other therapeutic areas like cancer. It's part of this broader fabric where we're, for the first time, really targeting in a very personalized way treatments to individuals' genetic composition. So the FDA just in the last year or two has approved the first cell and gene therapy to reverse blindness in kids, to address spinal muscular atrophy. We've got great late-stage data on just wretched diseases like hemophilia, sickle cell disease. So this is a part of a broader fabric of advances in our industry.
Stephen Ubel, thank you for this conversation. Thank you to Pharma for making the broader conversation about this moment possible. And over to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Caitlin Owens, a healthcare reporter here at Axios. Joining us now is our third and final guest is Dr. Albert Bourla, Chairman and CEO of Pfizer. He's joining us from Pfizer's offices in Connecticut. Dr. Bourla, thank you for joining us here at Axios.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
So let's just start off the conversation with kind of a hot topic right now. There's a lot of debate about how to get more vaccines across the world. And one of the more controversial ideas is to waive patent protections for the existing coronavirus vaccines, which would include yours. You are not in support of that move. So what is your take on how we should address this global vaccine shortage and just kind of the fact that it's projected to take years to reach global herd immunity?
I think the best way is to stick to the goal, and the goal is to have vaccines for all. I think two conditions need to be met so that everybody can have access to vaccines. The first is that we have a price that allows everyone to be able to pay for it. And the second is to have enough vaccines for all. The first one was easy to accomplish when it comes to our vaccine. Back in June, we established a tier pricing. So the rich countries, the high-income countries, based on the global bank definition, would pay the prices that we all know in the US or in Europe. It is the price of a takeaway meal, basically, a simple takeaway meal. But for the middle-income countries, we are giving the vaccine at half of its cost. And in fact, for the low-income countries, we give it at cost, non-for-profit, something that maybe not everybody knows here. And we do that because we do think that equity is not giving everyone the same. Equity it is to give more to those that they need more. Now, that was accomplished. The second one was way more challenging because, of course, there are billions of people in the world and everybody wants the vaccine now, and the vaccines were invented now. So it's very difficult to get also enough manufacturing quantities for all. But still, we reached out with this pricing to basically all the countries in the world back in the day. And we start receiving orders. We were able, because the orders were very high, to start increasing our manufacturing capacity. Right now, we are at a situation that we will be able to produce, our internal target is 3 billion doses. I gave recently a number of 2.5 billion, so to make sure that we have a cushion of what to deliver. But now we feel quite comfortable that we will do 3 billion doses this year. This means 4 billion doses next year. These are not doses for the rich or the poor. These are not doses for North or South, West or East. These are doses for all. In fact, from these doses this year, we are in discussions of 2.7 billion doses to allocate this year from our 3 billions of production. 40% is going to middle and low-income countries, which are the approximately 1 billion doses to them. So I believe that in the second half, we will see a disproportional allocations towards the middle and low-income countries, unlike what happened in the first half of the year, which is ending in a month, which we had much higher distribution to the high-income countries.
Right. And one other issue that's in the news a lot these days is the United States not using all of our vaccine doses, of which many million are Pfizer. States are not ordering their full allocation. There are doses that we are not using in the United States now. Do you have any ability to send unused doses abroad, or is that fully the United States government's call?
It is right now the United States government's call. There are some prohibitions for us to export right now from the US, but I was very, very pleased to hear President Biden 2 days ago that he already announced a change in this policy, rightly so. And we are looking forward to partner with the US government to make sure that doses produced on American soil are also finding their ways to low and middle income countries. Right now, most of the doses that we're sending to these countries comes out of Europe.
Another timely subject. What is the latest data and what is your latest thinking on boosters? So potentially a third shot that people will get, which we've said could be as soon as 6 to 12 months after their first round of doses.
It's a little bit preliminary because we are right now in the middle of these trials and the data are coming as we speak. But I did say publicly, and the data that I see coming, they are supporting the notion that likely there will be a need for a booster somewhere between 8 and 12 months. But that remains to be seen. And I believe in 1 to 2 months we will have enough data to speak about it with much higher scientific certainty.
Well, does that mean that some people who got their first shot 6 months ago, in a month or two, maybe they need a third one?
If they got their second shot 8 months ago, they may need a third one.
Okay, so this could be coming up sooner than we realize.
This could become sooner than late, I believe from September, October, but this is something, again, that the data need to confirm. And also, this is something that the healthcare authorities, in our case here in the US, CDC, will have to see what FDA approves and then makes a recommendation how best to protect the American people.
Right. So a topic that has become really intriguing to me, as a scientist, I'm sure you know, there's talk of a pan-coronavirus vaccine. So a vaccine that could work not just for this current coronavirus, but for future ones as well. Is this something that you see as a promising technology? And if so, what is the pathway to making it a reality?
I think that the mRNA technology, particularly, has revealed to us a tremendous, let's say, potential, and the ability to use this technology to do more miracles than what we did with COVID, such a high efficacy, I think is there. It's a little bit premature to speak about if we could do that, but yes, is it a potential scenario? Of course.
And is this a technology that Pfizer would be interested in investing in?
Oh yes, right now we are looking in the modified RNA on a very large number of other applications, including other infectious diseases. It's very well known that we are working on a flu vaccine because we made it publicly known, but we are working on many others right now with mRNA technology that we haven't revealed yet. But also we are looking very seriously other applications in genetic diseases or in cancer.
Right. And then there's also talk about next generation vaccines for this particular coronavirus. I think it's fair to say your vaccine and Moderna's have done, as well as anyone could have hoped for. That said, first of all, you don't make enough to vaccinate the entire world currently. And second of all, there are some countries that it's harder to get them to. Do you see these as obstacles that can be overcome, or do you think we need more vaccines on the market from different manufacturers?
Yeah, I think it's good to have more vaccines in the market from different manufacturers, but I want to say that ourselves, we will do enough. As I said, in the next 18 months, I expect to do 6 billion doses. We are going to make 3 billion doses this year from one that we have in the first half, so 2 billion doses more in the second half. That means on an annualized basis in 2022, 4 billion doses. And that's only one company. So I think there will be enough quantities. Now, about second generation, we constantly look to improve our vaccines and our medicines. And right now, it's very difficult to think something that will improve the efficacy because it's stellar. You can't achieve better than that. It's very difficult to think something that could improve the safety because also it's stellar. It's very difficult to achieve something better than that. But of course, we could do a few things to improve the ability to store the vaccine. As you know, we are right now registered in minus 70 degrees Celsius, but we could use it 2 weeks in normal freezer. Already we have data and we have applied, and we will our vaccine can be stored in a normal refrigerator for a month. That's a significant improvement because that provides tremendous flexibility with those that they are handling this vaccine. But also we are right now working on a new version of this vaccine that will be a ready-to-use vaccine, so you don't need to reconstitute it, you don't need to dilute it. And this vaccine can be stored up to 6 months in normal refrigeration, split 2 to 3 months in freezer, 2 to 3 months in normal in refrigeration, 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. So I think that will be pretty soon behind us.
So it sounds like a next generation Pfizer vaccine will be easier to store and easier to distribute.
That's all the efforts, the focus right now, and I'm very, very confident about what I'm telling you we are looking to achieve right now. Of course, it's never done before it is done. This is science. But I'm very confident that we are on a good way there.
Great. Well, Dr. Bourla, we like to kind of wrap things up with one fun thing. I have heard that you are working on a book. So I would just love to know, what has been your favorite thing to write about so far for this book?
Look, it's true. And actually, I woke up very early in the morning today and I spent time writing because the editor keeps pushing for manuscripts. Yeah, so I didn't know that how demanding that will be, but also I didn't know how rewarding that will be. I am focusing on things that could interest the world, and particularly things that the world can learn from that. And through my discussions with either political leaders or with key scientists or with the members of my team, I'm trying to explain to the world some key messages, one of which it is that our problem is not that we aim too high and we hit. Our problem is not that we aim too high and we miss. Our problem is that we aim too low and we hit. So I think I want to convey the notion that human ingenuity can achieve way more than we think it can.
That sounds great. Dr. Bourla, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you for joining another virtual event that made us all smarter, faster. Thank you to our sponsor, Pharma, for making this event possible. For more information or to sign up for Axios newsletters, like Axios' Healthcare Newsletter Vitals or Mike's Daily Axios AM, go to axios.com/newsletters or visit the Axios app. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you soon on axios.com.